Hello class, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Hoping that everyone's healthy, that your family is healthy as well, and that you're taking care of yourselves. Thank you for those who are volunteering each week and actively participating in some of these learning opportunities. Again, they're not required. It's just something that I think it's important that we continue our education somehow. This is the best format I think for math anyway. I don't know. Maybe you can give me some hints if there's some different ways we do it. But again, thank you for those who are volunteering. I know it's kind of strange times, but let's just jump kind of right in here and we'll talk about the topics today. All right, so you're kind of looking at the topics here on my iPad, and what we're looking at here is we're in part 3, week 4, and we're doing right triangles, and we're doing the trig functions, so like sine, cosine, tangent, and what those are used for, it's used for finding like missing parts of a triangle, right triangles. It has to be a right triangle. So there's 3 things: sine, cosine, tangent. We have the little acronym we use is called Sohcahtoa. Sohcahtoa. That's the little acronym we have that's in pretty much every textbook, and all it's basically used for is to set up your formulas for this formula for sine, the formula for cosine, the formula for tangent, and the little acronym, the little letters behind it are the actual formula. So again, all you really need to know is the main trig function names, sine, cosine, tangent, and then opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. And that's what those little letters are behind it. And hopefully you can kind of see my penmanship there. But let's jump right in and let's kind of talk about... Alright, so the first problem, we're trying to find x on this particular problem. That's the angle that we have here. And we're given, the wall that's right next to it, which is the adjacent. How I know that's the adjacent? It's next to the angle, but it's also touching the 90. That's why it's adjacent. And then this is the hypotenuse. That's the 14. How we know it's the hypotenuse? It's not touching the right angle. So we have adjacent and hypotenuse. So if I'm thinking about Sohcahtoa, I can already tell which one I have to use because this is the one that has an A and an H, adjacent and hypotenuse. That's the 2 labels I have. Or in the other case, maybe you want to label all 3 walls, the opposite wall. The opposite wall didn't have anything over there. I'm not even using it. There's not a number, there's not a letter there, so I can throw out all the ones with O's. So there's a couple different ways you can narrow down to which trig function you have to use, either by cross elimination, knowing what walls you're not using, or just what labels you had to have. So we're doing the cosine formula. That's the C. So cosine of your angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. That's what the A and H stand for. The second letter goes on the top, third letter goes on the bottom. That's how it always works. So plugging my letters and numbers where they need to go. So cosine of x is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So what I'm going to do first is figure out what 10 divided by 4 is on a calculator. So I got to figure out that decimal. 10 divided by 14. 10 divided by 14 is 0.71428. Okay. Now, the next thing is make sure that your calculator's in degree mode. You're going to need that. If you're on Google or if you're using a search engine, it's probably in degree mode, but you can always check. And then what we have to do is we have to find the angle. So to find the angle, this is the rare case where you have to take the trig function to the other side and do the little inverse button. It's called an arc cosine, or cosine of the -1, inverse cosine, but it's arc cosine. That's what they're usually called in upper level textbooks. And you're going to put the 0.7128 number back there. I don't care which one shows up. I'm writing both of these down in case your calculator doesn't have one versus the other. But again, if you hit that little shift cosine button, so the second key, and then hit cosine, and type in 0.7128, just make sure you're in degree mode, and it should tell you 44.5 degrees. And there's a bunch of other decimals, but I'm just kind of rounding. So there's the first one. We found the angle. Again, if you want to see a calculator here, I can type it in on mine. So I have a calculator here in front of you. So what I'm going to do is, on this particular calculator, I have to type in the decimal first. So 0.7128. And then I'm going to hit the little second key and hit the little cosine -1 button. So cosine little -1 key. And it should tell me 44.5. And a bunch of decimals behind it. So again, so cosine -1 key. Alright, so let's clear this all out. Alright, so let's jump right back in here and let's talk about the next one. Again, don't be concerned about maybe you don't have the best calculator in the world. You can always type it in Google. You guys have internet connections, obviously, if you're watching this video. But again, Just knowing how to type it in is kind of the important part, knowing the keys you have to hit so that you can be efficient when you want to find an answer. You know, that's still important. Jump in here and let's go to the next one. I got about 5 problems, 4 problems, something like that. 5 problems left over, 6. All right, so on this particular case, I'm going to just label my picture again. So I have my angle. This is the adjacent wall. Again, it's next to your angle and it's touching the 90. And this is the hypotenuse. So it looks like I'm using the same label. I'm using the cosine formula again because it's adjacent hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse. Again, how I know that? Because of Sohcahtoa. The ka formula in Sohcahtoa. I'm not using these because I didn't use opposite at all. And just knowing that it's A over H, so that's kind of why I always think about the little acronym. But this is cosine of the 48 degrees. They gave me the angle this time. The adjacent is 14, and I'm missing the hypotenuse. So like what we talked about in class is if the x is on the bottom, you have to do a little switcheroo thing here. If the x is ever on the bottom of your fraction. So we're going to flip the cosine of 48. That's going to switch the spots with the x. That's if the x is on the bottom of the fraction. And so this is what you're typing in. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to type in what the cosine of 48 is. Just hit the cosine button, hit 48, hit enter. It's going to give me a crazy decimal across my screen. 0.66913 blah 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 blah. That's the bottom number. And now I'm taking 14 divided by that. So 14 divided by 0.66913 blah 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 blah, and getting about 20.9. And that's the hypotenuse. And that makes sense. It's got to be the biggest wall. So it's making sense that it's bigger than the 14. But again, it's because the x landed on the bottom. Again, it's not every problem doesn't have to be cosine. So don't be expecting that every problem is cosine. It's just that in these particular cases, you know, I had an adjacent and hypotenuse that were clearly labeled there. But every problem is solved differently. There's 3, types of problems. There's you're finding angles, you're finding a wall on the bottom of a fraction like this one, and then there's ones where the x is on the top. And hopefully those will be somewhere at some point in these rest of these problems. But let's keep going. Again, these are from the Google form that I sent out. If you haven't done those, you can always jump back and go through those. But let's go to the next one here. All right, so next one. Let's do some labels here. So this is the opposite wall. It's across the picture. This is the hypotenuse again. So in Sohcahtoa, it looks like I'm using the So formula. I'm using opposite and hypotenuse. I'm not using adjacent wall at all, so those were thrown out. So the Sine formula is opposite over hypotenuse. That's the O and H. Second letter goes on the top, third letter goes on the bottom. That's how it always works. So sine of my 12 degrees is the opposite over hypotenuse. So the x on the bottom of this one, so just like the last one, we're going to do a little switcheroo here. The sine of 12 will go to the bottom, and I'll just type that in my calculator. Now I'm going to type in the sine of 12 first. I don't have to hit any shift buttons. I'm just going to type in sine and type in 12 and get 0.2079. And then take 16 divided by that number, 0.2079. So I get 76.96. So there's your hypotenuse. Again, I know it seems a little big, but again, it was a 12-degree angle. 12 is not very big, so the wall is going to be quite large compared to that. Because again, how this works, I know this seems a little odd, like how I can kind of predict. The bigger the angle, the closer it is to the size of the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse is across from 90, so this is across from 12. So it's not really proportional, but there is a slight relationship there, so I can kind of tell if the wall's gonna be big, small. I was predicting this one was gonna be pretty large before I even started. All right, let's jump into the next one here. What we have here is we have adjacent wall and we have hypotenuse. So it looks like I'm using the cosine formula. Cosine of an angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. Again, on Sohcahtoa. I wasn't using opposites at all. Opposite would have been this wall. It wasn't even used, so I can throw out the ones with the O's in them. So I had to use cosine formula. That's how it can kind of narrow down. But again, plugging in my numbers here, cosine of my, 46 degrees is the adjacent wall over the hypotenuse. So it looks like on this one, the x on the top. So this is one I was kind of talking about earlier. If x is on the top, you have to multiply this bottom number across. So the x is going to stay, the 15 will go across and be multiplied on cosine of 46. So what I would do is figure out the cosine of 46 in the calculator, type in cosine, hit 46, gives me a crazy decimal, which is 0.6946, blah, 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 and then take that times 15. So I'm getting 10.42 roughly, or 10.4 if you want. And there's your wall. Again, 15 times whatever the cosine of 46 is, and that's usually a decimal. Okay, we got only a few problems left here. So again, labels, this is the opposite wall across my angle, that's the opposite side, and this is the adjacent. Alright, so in Sohcahtoa, I'm using opposite and adjacent, that's got to be Toa. That's the O and A. I'm not using hypotenuses at all, so it has to be tangent. So tangent of my angle is opposite over adjacent over A. So this would be tangent of 38 degrees is opposite over the adjacent. The adjacent, since the x on the top, I'm going to multiply the 2 across. 2 times the tangent of 38. Type that in my calculator. I'm typing the tangent of 38 first. Figure out what that number is. So tangent of 38 on a calculator is like 0.7812, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm going to take that times 2. So this ends up being 1.56. And there's your number. All right. 2 problems left here. Number 7. Okay, so we're given the adjacent here, and this is the hypotenuse. And we're not using opposite, so I'm using the cosine formula. So cosine of the angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. Again, how I know that, Sohcahtoa, this is telling me my formulas. I'm using adjacent and hypotenuse, so I had to be this one. Again, second letter is on the top, so A is on the top, H is on the bottom. That's how it's working. So cosine of 30 degrees, sorry, I had a notification there. Adjacent is 16, and the hypotenuse is x. So since x on the bottom, I have to do a little switcheroo thing here, so, since x is on the bottom. So I'm going to move the x across, and it will not let me write 6 for some reason. There we go. So 16, I'm going to put the cosine of 30 on the bottom. I actually need to figure out what that cosine of 30 is first. So cosine of 30 on my calculator. Cosine of 30 is 0.8660. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 16 divided by that number, 0.8660. I'm getting 18.4. There you go. There's your hypotenuse. And it made sense. I had to be the biggest wall. And the last problem of the day here. So we're given this is the opposite, and this is the adjacent wall. There's no hypotenuse. I'm using Toa. How I know that so quickly is because it's opposite and adjacent. So Toa is the only one that has an O and an A in it. So tangent of my angle is the opposite wall over the adjacent wall. O over A. Second letter on the top, third letter on the bottom. Since x on the bottom, I'm going to do a little switcheroo thing here. It's their little rule if the x is ever on the bottom. So tangent of 66. So I'm typing 33, and I'm taking it divided by the tangent of 66. Now tangent of 66 on a calculator is 2.24. There's a bunch of other decimals, 46. And I'm going to take 33 divided by that number. So 33 divided by 2.246, I'm getting 14.6927. So there's your adjacent wall. All right. Again, I'm thinking that this is starting to make sense to you. I know it's kind of tough the way we're kind of doing this, but thank you for those volunteers that trying each and every week, trying out some problems. You know, these are opportunities. They're voluntary. They're not required. It's just one of those things I think it's important that we still continue our education somehow in some format. But again, first priority really is your health, your family's health. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your families. Again, I miss you guys. I know it seems kind of weird, but it's just kind of it's nice to have the interaction in class and it's lively conversations every day. But again, take care of yourself, and hope to see you guys real soon. Bye, guys.